Hello, hello, and happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome to episode 29 of the Flight Attendant Show. This is the weekly series I created for everything we're curious about, challenged by, or just want to talk more about. And we're going to dedicate a little bit of time today to talk more about conflict, specifically conflict case studies. These are going to be good because we have joining us again today an expert in this field. This is Leslie Neidick. She is the conflict strategist. This is what she does. And she's going to share with us a couple of case studies. I'm really excited to hear so much about these. But before we do, a couple of housekeeping notes as we always start every show. And today we have some extra crispiness going on. If you are here, thank you. If you're able to get it on LinkedIn, share the YouTube link. I was not able to reactivate the LinkedIn link. I'm not sure what was happening, but we are live streaming as we do every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. on LinkedIn, but also Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. So I put the YouTube link in the chat. If you have anybody that you want to invite, please share that link with them so that they can join us too. And as you're already doing, please, as you enter the chat, take a moment, let us know where you're watching from. Hi, Kirsten. Hi, Carrie. Hi, everybody. Any questions, comments that you have for Leslie, definitely let her know. And, just lastly, as we always do, a moment of gratitude. This show doesn't happen without an audience. You guys, and the fact that you chose to spend a little bit of your path with us here today when there are a million things competing for all of our attention every day, that means a lot. And so to have you here with us live or watching the replay, thank you. We really appreciate that. And now, without further ado, I definitely want to welcome Leslie back. I so enjoy having conversations with you about this topic because it's such an ever-present thing in our lives, but it's also something that's vastly misunderstood. And being an expert in it, I love that we get to talk about that. So thank you for joining us again today. Yeah.
Oh, and thank you. And I love the way you described it, that it's something that is just with us and it's misunderstood. And
Yeah.
that's why people are so uncomfortable with it. Oh, hi, Raquel. Hi, Carrie. Hi, Kristen. Thank
Yeah.
you for joining us despite the maybe LinkedIn, we're not really connected through there.
Yeah,
So,
I'm not sure. Everything was fine, but this is the second time I should mention that LinkedIn has done that. And so, for whatever reason, sometimes it will overwrite the URL, but it's live. This is a live stream. That's the way it goes. So we
yeah.
just roll with it.
And we
Yeah.
just and we just go. And today, I'm really excited to talk about these two cases because I think more than just when we chat about theory and ideas, perhaps these cases will shed more light and show real examples, and they are real cases of how to, kind of navigate the conflict world, especially in the workplace.
Yes. Yes. I think that's so important. Hi, Chastity. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm so glad more people are being able to
yes.
access the live stream. This is great. Yeah, I definitely
And
want to hear more about these case studies. I love that you
great.
brought case studies. Yeah.
So we can get started. And I think the good news is that perhaps the LinkedIn event link is working because I see Raquel is coming in
Mm-hmm.
from LinkedIn. So
Yay.
hopefully more people can join or they'll watch
Definitely.
the recording,
Yeah.
and that's all good too.
Yeah.
So if it's good, I just really look forward to this. So maybe we should just get started because
Yeah.
I actually have questions for the audience. So we're
All
expecting
right.
feedback. So this first case I'm going to do in a few parts in sections. So let me start out with it's about two project managers. Their names are Greg and Marcia. They work together at the research and development department of Brady and Company.
Okay.
And I've changed the names and the company name, and perhaps some people will understand the source of the names and the last name, but it will show their age or if they liked this show and reruns, but we'll get there. So until recently, their working relationship was good, or so it seemed, until Greg brought up a complaint against Marcia to their supervisor. The supervisor suggested that Greg have a discussion with Marcia first to see if they could work it out themselves. So this is where the question comes in. Before we go into more detail, if you were their supervisor, would you have offered that same suggestion? Or maybe there's something else you would have tried? I'd love to hear in the comments, and I'd love to know what Gretchen thinks. And everyone should know Gretchen had no idea what cases I'm doing. So whatever she answers, it's in the moment.
I really want to hear what the audience has to say. And just for anybody who is just joining us, because we do have a couple of people, can you just walk us back through that one more time? Because I really want people
Sure.
to get this one and kind of think about it. Yeah.
Yes, please. And hi, Mike Asherbrenner. Thank you for being here. So it's about two project managers,
Okay.
Greg and Marcia. They work together at the research and development department at Brady and Company.
Okay.
Until recently, their working relationship was good, or so it seemed, until Greg brought up a complaint against Marcia to their supervisor. The supervisor then suggested that Greg have a discussion with Marcia as a first step to see if they could work it out themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is that if you were the supervisor, is that what direction you would have gone in? Or is there something else you would have tried?
So I have a thought, but I want to know, does the audience have a thought before I launch into mine? Anybody have anything they want to say? Let's say, so Raquel says she's been looking forward to this one. But does anybody have a thought on what they would do? I do, definitely.
And of course
Um,
I do too.
yeah. So if yeah, Mike, she is awesome. So my
Thank you,
my
Mike.
thought as a manager would be if Greg came to me with this and it was a complaint, I would need more information before I would send him back out to work it out in team. I really would want to know some specifics about what the complaint is. And so the the context would be very, very important to me. And I'm not sure, do I have that yet in this case study, or because that's where I would go first. Yeah.
Again, this wasn't pre-planned, everybody. Gretchen did not have this information at all. And
No.
in different words, she really described what I said. I mean, we all have instincts of how we handle this if we receive a complaint.
Yeah.
The thing is, you mentioned the key point, the context. Context matters a lot.
Yeah.
Um, there's no one right answer because it's going to depend on the individuals that are involved, how their relationships with each other that you've observed or experienced, even their relationship with the supervisor.
Yeah.
Depending on that triangle, that
Yeah.
could have uh, kind of triggered the supervisor to say, you know what, you two try together. Now, what I find is that most people go with their habit versus addressing the context. And
Hmm.
that's my key point to bring up. Really, you shouldn't always have the same answer. The first
Yeah.
step shouldn't be the same for every time a complaint or issue gets raised. It
Yeah.
really depends on the individuals and the the perceived power imbalances or balance between them. It's just a lot
Yeah.
of factors to
Yeah. Yeah.
consider.
No, it is. And I
So,
think that's such great information too, because
mm,
that context and subjectivity of the conflict, there's a lot more nuance to get into there. So I love that one. Okay,
yeah.
I'm ready.
So here's a little more detail. So the basis of Greg's complaint was an incident the prior week that occurred in the employee lounge. Greg thought Marcia was openly critical of him, and he was very upset about it. And there were other people, observers, people who could hear what was going on between the two of them.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Marcia felt attacked by Greg when he approached her, and she was also embarrassed by the whole incident and was trying to ignore it all. As a result of the supervisor's suggestion, they are now meeting to talk about it. So my question is, what do you think happened next? Do you think they worked it out? Did it end in further frustration, or did something else happen?
Okay,
And
audience,
I
this is for you too. So that's the question. What do you guys think? I see Melissa here. I see Nathan is here. Mike is here. We have Chastity. We have Brian Poindexter. Like we have a lot of people in the house. Carrie. So what do you guys think? Do we think that Greg and Marcia worked it out, or do we think that something else happened? What do you guys think? So
and I
everybody's still
see there's
saying
a
hello.
mixture of YouTube and LinkedIn, so
Yeah. So people
definitely
are
look
still
at
getting here on LinkedIn,
screen.
so that's great. But thank you, YouTube, for being there. Oh, Anne's here.
Yes.
Awesome. So for anybody who just came in, what do you guys think? So we have this case study that Leslie has shared with us, and we needed to get a little more information. So do you want to recap it for anybody who just came in? Because I really want to hear what you guys think. We have a lot
Yes.
of leaders in this chat, a lot of industry leaders. So yeah.
So I'm going to just kind of merge both parts that before we separated. So
Okay.
it starts with there are two project managers, Greg and Marcia. They work at the research and development department of Brady and Company. Until recently, their working relationships were good. But Greg went to his supervisor to complain about Marcia. The supervisor advised him to go ahead and meet with Marcia and try to work it out themselves. And then we talked about how what would each of us do? And I was
Yeah.
pointing out that many of us go with what our habit is versus really addressing context and
Yeah.
thinking about the relationships between the two employees and ourselves to determine, do you really want to send them off on their own?
Yeah.
In some cases, the answer is yes. And in some
Yeah.
cases, maybe they need a little help.
Yeah.
So then what happened next is I provided a little more information about Greg's complaint was that there was an incident the prior week in the
Mhm.
employee lounge where not only Marcia was there, but other people were there. And he felt that she was openly critical of him and he was very
Mhm.
upset about it. Meanwhile, Marcia, who had been approached by Greg in this employee lounge, she felt attacked and she was embarrassed because other people heard and saw this, and she was in the middle of another conversation with someone over lunch.
Okay.
So, as a result of all this, they're now meeting together. So, my question is, what do you think happened next? Did
So,
they work it out? Did they end it in further frustration? And we'd love to hear from the
yes.
audience.
So we have a couple of comments, and I have to call out Anne. So Anne says, I'm gonna put on the screen. Carol and Michael probably have wise words of wisdom. I love it.
Thank you
She
very
got the
much.
reference. I love it. And then Chastity says, right here, she says, I think it depends on the person whether they're willing to work it out. Now, I don't see anybody else with a comment specific to this one, but I still have a question regarding what happened. Oh, wait, Nathan has. They're going to need to start by getting those feelings out and acknowledging each other's experience, which I think is incredibly important. And Melissa chimes in, of course, sit down and have them Venn diagram it. Yes, that's Venn diagram. I don't know if
I
that's a
love
play
it.
on words, but I think that's hilarious. Um, but I think that this is a really good one. Time bomb without assistance. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, to me, I still don't know. Still a critical piece of information for me missing in terms of what actually was the dialogue. What was said that got misconstrued. I still don't know enough to really do anything. And I actually don't know that I know enough as their supervisor to send them off to work it out together. I really do think that there
Yes.
needs to be some more um, information shared and understanding about what actually took place. And again, at this point, you tell me, with other people in witness, now you could also have a telephone game brewing, right? And that also, and
Yes.
again, the fact that he waited, so now he's been sitting with this, and there might be new narratives being created that so there are things, afoot here. And so for me, I'm still on team. I would like more information about this one before I send them off. But Yeah, so let me read a couple more of these comments.
Yes.
Oh, did Mike? I'm sorry, I missed a couple of things. So we started out with, or we had Nathan, and then Mike has a comment with Anne. Thank you for faith in me. I call Leslie anytime there's a conflict. I would maybe handle it like a Viking berserker without her wisdom when emotions are high. Absolutely. And I know that Brian just had a comment. My guess would be that it didn't end well. A mediator may be necessary to fact find and control the conversation rather than open the door to more emotional interaction, which I think is really important. Okay. So, with that being said, we've had some great audience input. What did the case study show?
Fabulous. Well, I do wanna just go back to some points that have been
Yeah.
raised.
Yeah.
This whole idea of emotion, or even Gretchen, you said, "I don't really know what happened." It was
Yeah.
just, quote, offered as, "I have a complaint against
Yeah.
Marcia." And
Yeah.
that's important to just get that overview, first of all, to determine if it's just a conflict, and I don't mean just a conflict that it's not important, or if it should be categorized in some other way that needs to be handled much more in an investigative type of manner
Yeah. Yeah.
versus two people having communication issues. There
Yeah.
could be a fine line, but there's a very clear line between those two things.
Yeah.
So, what happened though, as you can imagine, and even as was suggested here about a mediator, it, essentially it was a repeat of what happened in the lounge because emotions were still what was talking.
Right.
They were talking at each other and they still weren't talking with each other.
Okay.
They were at an impasse and they chose to meet with a neutral or mediator, which ended up being me. And that brings my involvement into it. So,
Yeah.
and first I have to say thank you very much, Anne, for mentioning Carol and Mike, because I was trying to come up with names, and that seemed like, oh, let me pull it from one of my favorite shows as a kid,
Yeah.
Brady Bunch. So I met with Greg and Marcia.
Okay.
Our meeting started with how I normally start, introductions, set some ground rules, and this usually involves like how long we're going to meet, agreeing that we're going to talk in a manner that is acceptable to
Yeah.
each. And we're going to give everyone time to talk, no interruptions, and things like that. So each did have a chance to share their story, and then it was up to me to ask some questions. What questions would you want to ask Greg and Marcia?
Does anybody do you guys want to chime in? Uh, Carrie likes the old school reference of Greg and Marcia. Anybody want to chime in with questions that you would have for Greg and Marcia if you were Leslie? Nathan says, Leslie, how
Well,
important do
that's
you think it is to be careful about catastrophizing these moments? Do we risk making it more intense by treating it as such? I think that's really, and that could go directly to the question that you might ask,
yes,
as that neutral third party. Um, for me, I still would like more information about the catalyst for this whole thing, and then understanding if there's a way to break it down from there, so that we understand what it is, not what it's become. And so
yes,
yeah, but that's where I would go.
key,
Yeah. Yeah.
key. And but I appreciate that point with that Nathan raised.
Nathan,
Like,
yeah,
be careful not to focus just on what seems like a catastrophe, whatever happened in the employee lounge,
yeah,
and you know, take out the layers
yeah,
and figure out what's really going on there because there may be a lot of assumptions about what people might have overheard. And those are the feelings that perhaps triggered um, Greg to go to his supervisor, the
yeah,
fear of what other people were thinking and the assumptions about it.
absolutely, yeah,
So, and that really is what worked well next. I really tried to break it down by saying I asked them to talk about how they worked together before that incident. Like we took that incident and said, let's just put it to the side for the moment. It's still
Yeah.
important, but let's figure out how we got here. So, um, and that was why I needed to do that, because otherwise the emotions of whatever occurred there, even
Hmm.
if that was the actual conflict, I wanted to find out if there was more, if there
Yeah.
was something else. Uh, and to find out what their relationship was like, what their work was like, how they felt about work, how they felt about the company. These
Yeah.
things could create some common ground as well and kind of bring them back together.
Yeah.
I needed them to hear each other's like compliments, accomplishments, so they could be reminded of all that was good between them. Because those like key
Yeah.
moments that occur when we say a word that hurts someone else, they seem to erase everything else, and I wanted to unerase it all. So as it turns out, there really were a lot of layers to this case. Uh, they had worked together for many years. It was good. The employee lounge incident, though, was a symptom and really wasn't the actual conflict.
Okay.
I found out that there were many wrong assumptions that had occurred during the past year, and neither wanted to rock the boat. They had this long term good relationship inside the office and outside the office.
Hmm.
And they got along well. Their families like would get together at times. They didn't want to mention it. They just said, I'm not going to say anything. Well, they didn't talk about it. So for each of them, these different incidents had occurred and were frustrating them. And unfortunately, it exploded
Yeah.
in the employee lounge because then another thing occurred that kind of got Greg to go, this is it. I'm done. Instead of ever talking about the original
Yes.
incidents that occurred. So what really like did we conclude, and even they concluded, which I put the we, but it was more important what they concluded. Talk to each other at
Yeah.
the onset of anything. If something feels wrong and you have a relationship with someone, mention it. Hey,
Yeah.
what happened yesterday felt a little uncomfortable. Let's
Yep.
talk about it. Otherwise, you build this conversation in your head. Oh, he meant to do that. He meant to hurt me. And then it goes on and on and on. And then something else happens, but you're clouded by this original incident that you may
Hmm.
have misinterpreted, which was the case. Um, what happened when you let all of that build while the foundation then weakens, this good relationship is now no longer good, at least in your heads.
Yeah.
We can get back to it. It eventually collapses, and unfortunately, it will take even more time to
Hmm.
unravel it and get back to where you were. They did, though, and that
Yeah.
was the good news. But I have to tell you, it wasn't like simple. It wasn't one meeting to
Yeah.
unravel it. You can't just ask that question and go, "Oh, so when was your relationship good? Oh, okay, let's get that back."
Yeah.
Because most people, if they've put off something in their head, they'll
Yeah.
even put off mentioning it. Like, oh, yeah, you know what? I forgot. It was
Yep.
that one day he didn't invite me to a meeting and that hurt me. But I put it aside. Don't worry. I put it aside.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah. Yeah. Those kind of avoiding strategies, they really do have a big ripple effect, and you don't necessarily feel it in the moment. You actually think you're doing the right thing by not calling it out, but by doing that, you're not addressing it. And those things they do fester. Brian Poindexter had a long comment earlier, and I wanted to show it before we move on. He had said, I would like to get an account of the event from each perspective and look for consistent portions that can be agreed upon or that overlap to uncover the truth. And I think that kind of goes, in line with what you were saying, the many layers, right? That overlapping to get down to what was really happening. And I love the way Anne put it. She called it a slow boil, right? That it's
Yes.
that kind of slow boil conflict that is always simmering there, and it can only, just takes one thing, right? To sort of light that tinderbox up. So I love that. Um, you know,
Yes.
I, my question would be, oh, and Anne says, assumptions plus avoidance equals resentment. Yeah.
S
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not that we wanna be in a situation where, like, everything that gets said needs a further explanation,
Yeah.
but it does
Yeah.
when it hurts you.
Yeah.
But it can be asked as a question. It doesn't have to be, "Oh, you just hurt me." "Hey, what did you mean by that?"
Yeah.
Because if your initial reaction is a negative interpretation, then ask. Because otherwise, you're gonna keep that negative interpretation. You might find out, "Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I
It's
initially I heard it differently, and now you said it, so it's
Yep.
done."
It's interesting because oftentimes that avoiding it, thinking you don't wanna call attention to it and make it worse, you're doing that by assuming facts not in evidence. You've created a story that you've told yourself about it, and I'm not gonna deal with that now, but that story may not be true. And so I love this case study. Yeah, no, this is good, this is
So,
good. Yep.
um, I have another one that's a little bit different and points out something else. So Peter, is the office coordinator, and Jan is his new manager at Sam's Meatpacking Corporation. Peter has worked there for 5 years and has been happy with his role at work, which is he answers inquiries via phone and email and a lot of other administrative type tasks and delivering information to people. Jan came in hoping to elevate Peter's role at the company by having him attend meetings with other departments, do presentations, develop strategic plans, and more activities along those lines. Peter began pushing back immediately. His work ethic began to suffer, and Jan felt like she couldn't continue to work with Peter. If you were the neutral person facilitating a meeting between Peter and Jan, how would you approach this? And I know this is a very loaded question and could be much more than just a couple of sentences or
Mm.
lines in the comments. But think about that. Like, what would be your instinct of where to start, how to approach this? If you were the manager, because this, the manager of them, even to advise
Yeah.
Jan of what to do.
What do you guys think? Anybody got anything? I know Mike says he's taking tons of notes over here, and Brian, I think this preceded this case study. There are times when productive conflict is so beneficial. We have to find ways to feel comfortable discussing our differences or viewpoints because it allows people to achieve alignment, not always agreement. That is a really good distinction. That alignment and agreement aren't always the same. And then Nathan says, I'd pick up with Jan. You don't feel like you can work with Peter. Do you still want to? Okay.
And listen, all questions are good. The danger in a yes or no question is what direction would you go at? Like, be aware you might get the no.
Right.
And then does that end the conversation? Doesn't have to, but in Jan's mind, it might end the conversation. Like, well, why do
Mhm.
I have to even talk more? I told you what the conclusion is. I don't want to work with you. Um, and I'm pointing that one out just because closed questions, which are typically things that only require a one-word answer or particularly yes or no,
Mhm.
they really can close off a conversation. So I try to hold those till some later point in a conversation where I may need to confirm things. I may need to learn something. But at the start, if we go with yes, no, I'm just taking stabs and guessing
Okay.
versus learning more about what they're thinking.
And Nathan says he'd follow that up with the open-ended why, but then Melissa has a statement. She says, "I would listen but refocus on the company goals and how we can get those to get them to align on those, sorry, and instead of focusing on the differences."
And I want to say for all of the responses, no, there's no one right answer. There never will be one right answer. Well, anything can work, and you can try anything. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter if it doesn't work perfectly, then try another question. So I want to, at any point during a conflict, I just want to point
Mhm.
out there's never like one size fits all ever. It
Yeah,
really context matters a lot. Your
it does.
relationships with
Yeah.
people matter a lot.
It's interesting too because and Nathan says he likes the point about, the risk you take in closing it off. And so he's really glad that you pointed that out. And one of the questions that I have is the hierarchy or the structure, the reporting structure between Peter and Jan. And so did that have anything to do with it? Because, when Jan brought if I remember right, when Jan brought Peter in, she had really good goals for him. She wanted him to take a wider role maybe in the company. And so she had pre-planned some of these, courses for him, of action to go to, meetings and whatnot. Maybe he wasn't participant in that. Maybe he had thoughts about it as well. So maybe there wasn't that alignment on what that role actually was when he came in. So maybe he had a thought and she had a thought and they weren't talking about their thoughts. So maybe that also is an avenue that could be explored.
You bring up a great point. And that question needs to be asked. In this case, Peter was already there.
Oh,
So he
okay,
had
okay.
she replaced his prior manager. Same circumstances occur. He has
What
preconceived notions of what's
Yeah,
going to continue. Just because
yeah,
someone new came in, he thinks it's gonna be same old,
yep,
because that's what he's comfortable with.
yeah,
Um, and Jan, hey, wants to come in, wants to make her mark, and also had a very different experience on her prior, positions,
mhm,
where no matter what the title was, everyone was much more engaged. And she expected that people had the same aspirations as her for advancement. And that's why I'm using this case, because I could tell you whether I'm teaching or training, and I ask people to bring in their conflicts. The one that comes all the time, it's not always the most common, but there has never been a team or class or training that I've done that someone doesn't bring this, where they may be the manager or a coordinator of some kind, and they assume everyone has the same career aspirations.
yeah,
Well, why wouldn't they want to advance? And they'll look at me and go, I can't even listen to you, Leslie. Why wouldn't they want to advance? They
yeah,
can't, they are so stuck on that everyone wants to advance their career in the way they see advancement. And
yeah.
that's a big
That
disconnect.
It is, and also it's that sort of that assumption sort of closes off the discussion opportunities really to get to I to sorry, to get to know, to get an idea of what the other person really wants, what matters to them. I have been guilty of that. I will just share this with you. When I was a hiring manager, I was a department head for a little over a decade, and I had somebody on my team who was lights out, great at everything, everything, and I was like, girlfriend is on the management track. She can do it. She didn't want it. I never asked her. She didn't want it. And because we had a great relationship, when I offered it to her, she took it. She didn't want it. She was good at it, but it wasn't what she wanted.
Yes.
And I didn't know that until she left me and she went to another opportunity because I gave her what I assumed she wanted. We never talked about it. She was so good at everything. I did not read that room right. And I knew her well, but I didn't ask the question. And I learned a good lesson from that.
Yeah.
Yep.
And this mismatch of where people want their careers to go or not go is rarely talked about. I mean, I could think of one person I know who I graduated with, I think, from Cornell. And he's also the only person I know who's worked for the same company since we graduated, and it's quite a few decades.
Nice.
And at his company, they have annual meetings with different managers, teams, whoever it is, and they just get asked, so what are your life goals? And they don't mean the stuff, where do you see yourself in 5 years? They really want to know, like, where do you want to live? Like,
Yeah.
we have so many opportunities. And I've never been asked that, or never. If I have, I believed it was a loaded question and I
Yeah.
didn't
Right.
really answer.
Yeah.
What are my life goals? I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's always assumed that
Yeah.
everyone wants to just keep on going up the corporate ladder.
Yeah.
Uh, some people want to like be in every different department because they know in the end they're going to build their own business and they want to
Yeah. I think
experience it all.
No, I think that's great. I wanted to read also Brian's comment here. He says, one of the age old cases where curiosity can prevent so many conflicts. There has to be an intentional discovery period where we learn about one another prior to assigning goals, expectations. And I think that that is really important. Even, and tell me if this is something in your line of work that is done. We think of onboarding often as the foray into the company, but what about lateral or interdepartmental moves? There should be onboarding that goes on there as well, because that's a new environment. That's a new professional experience for the manager and everybody else. So, is
Yes.
that something that companies are doing or should they be doing?
I wish it would be done more. I think it's often assumed you move to a different department or a different team that onboarding is not necessary because you're all at the same company. We
Yeah.
all know. And those of us who especially have have a lot of crossover in our
Yeah.
responsibilities when I worked in corporate, that I met, all the different divisions and teams because I was managing the real estate and design and construction. If I went to, one office in San Francisco, another office in Hong Kong, and another office in Northern Virginia, sometimes wasn't sure I was at the same company. It was very different.
Yeah.
And then that is never considered
Yeah.
when you're moving. So I think even that culture shock, and that's really important to know. I think the reason why these conversations don't take place is because I don't care what decade we're in, we're always in a rush. There's never enough time.
Yeah.
And time is considered the driver rather than stepping back and doing what we need to do because we'll like that thing of slow down
Yeah.
to speed up.
Yeah.
That's completely forgotten. And it's assumed we've got to finish that project in a rush early.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there is to get to know each other. And
Yeah.
I just want to say, I know I've seen some like comments and questions passing by from everyone here. So I'll definitely be coming back to the comments and replying to people. And I don't know if we'll be able to do that on LinkedIn, but I'll go to YouTube too and see,
Yeah.
or at least
Yeah.
watch the live and I'll message people.
Yeah.
So
I hope.
I just want to know or
No,
see
I,
your
I agree
comments.
with you. I hope that LinkedIn is cooperating. Nathan says, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. I mean, there's a book called In Praise of Slowness that came out a few years ago, and it's a really good read, but it's also a good reminder that when you are slowing down, it doesn't mean you're stopping and it doesn't mean you're not paying attention. It means you're paying careful attention. You're really looking at something, and doing that can actually collapse the time to
Yes.
finish to goal to whatever it is that you want to achieve with that. I think that that's really good. Oh, Susanna is here. She
Hi,
says, "Sorry,
Susanna.
I'm late. LinkedIn wouldn't let me join by phone." Yeah, we're having some LinkedIn challenges today, but that's the nature of live stream. Couldn't get on
And,
the computer until now. We are glad that you're here, Susanna. We have had a couple
yes.
of really great case studies from Leslie. And for anybody who doesn't know, Leslie is an expert in conflict strategy, and you can connect with her if you aren't already. Her website is there, The Conflict Strategist, and her LinkedIn, Leslie Neidick, and also her YouTube channel, which I did not put here, and shame on me. But The Conflict Strategist, because there's a lot of really
Yes.
good stuff that she posts there. Her blog is great with a lot of tips and actionable like advice that you can use and implement
Mhm.
in your everyday life. I think one of the best ones today so far that I'm hearing is, when you are having a challenge, you know, address it. Don't wait, because when you may, I mean, if you need to process it for yourself, but if it's in the
Sure.
moment and something lights you up, that's a great opportunity, especially if you have a relationship with that person, to address it then, and not let it sort of grow into something more than it needs to be. Yeah.
And be aware that quite often our reactions are based on assuming what the person meant.
Right.
So let's just ask rather than even addressing the feeling. You had like this initial, like, oh, that sounds. That
Yeah.
doesn't sound great to me. Oh, before I start letting those feelings even repeat itself, let me ask, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I thought you said this, and this. Tell me more. And
Yeah.
the reason why I picked this case, because I think that's also the thing that has to be unraveled. And also that we don't have to have immediate answers.
Yeah.
It's not just like, here's Peter, here's Jan, here's the situation, this is how we're gonna fix it. Um,
Mhm.
because we know it won't work, because Gretchen, your example of when you gave that woman a promotion and then she ends up leaving, an
Yeah.
action doesn't just like fix it or even undo it. It just
Yeah.
becomes, let us learn from it. So
Yeah.
in this particular situation, well, Jan's desire, like to facilitate growing Peter's position, was admirable. Peter really saw it as Jan simply wanting to offload her work on him. That's how he saw it. He didn't
Yeah.
even see it as that she cares about me, that she wants me to advance.
Yeah.
That wasn't even on his mind. In our discussions, instead of having to choose between it's Jan's option or it's Peter's option, which was more about the status quo, we started brainstorming.
Mhm.
Uh, we literally broke everything down. Like, what was going on? What does this department do? What do you need to accomplish? What are the goals for the department as well as the individuals? Um, and we also did some like temporary testing of things. An idea would be raised. I don't think that'll work. Are you willing to try that for 5 days and see what happens?
Mhm.
So it didn't, and then they even saw it, this is like this kind of communication was really also creating the framework for their future,
Yeah.
communication, because it
Yeah.
didn't have to be, it's your way or my way.
Yeah.
It's, well, let's look at that. So it became testing some things, then there was feedback to talk about. Then they started identifying what worked well, what didn't work so well, came up with other ideas. It was a lot of back and forth. And again, it didn't become Jan's way or Peter's way. It eventually became their way,
I love it.
which looked entirely different than their individual plans. So there's a couple of things. Change is difficult.
Yeah.
So no matter what, even if Peter wanted his job to change in the way Jan wanted it, and he didn't initially, all of it. There were parts that were okay for him. But change is difficult and it needs to be negotiated and communicated. You can't just, here it is. This is what we're
Yeah.
doing. I think another key point is brainstorming and trying and back and forth, and that it can be a conversation. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean there isn't a decision maker. It doesn't mean that Peter has to agree to everything. But there are times where Peter was like, I don't know if I like that, but I understand why that's the better choice. So that part works for me and I'll make it work.
Mhm.
And then I didn't most of by the time we got to that kind of conversation, both of them saw that the testing was working and they were both listening to the feedback. My presence facilitated their conversation. I didn't have to say a lot.
Yeah.
Started asking each other the open questions like, "Hey, what didn't work with that? What worked well? What part did you like? What
Yeah.
part didn't you like?" And it was the respect that was really growing between the 2 of them, and, essentially, they were building their relationship in these meetings.
I love that. I really do, and it's so important to do that. I don't know, there's a strategy that I also like, yes, and. So if you have people who are in a disagreement, you know, when you're hearing them, and it's a validation, so it's a recognition of them when you're hearing what they're saying and you're acknowledging that with a yes. I like that, and then you can add your suggestion, you can tuck it right in there. It's a very non-offensive sort of easy organic way to facilitate and keep that dialogue going, because you're not disagreeing.
Yes.
You're acknowledging that the other person has an opinion and a perspective,
Yes.
and it
Yes.
doesn't have to agree with yours, but they have one, and that's legitimate. And maybe we can consider this too, in addition to that, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think another part that we have to exercise our flexibility, uh, skill or superpower, hopefully,
Yeah.
that knowing that I don't necessarily know how this is going to end up. Just be flexible, be
Yeah.
open. And someone mentioned earlier, be curious and be willing. Like, hey, curiosity should be, okay, it doesn't sound like a great idea to me. I'll try it.
Yeah.
Um, and then believing that there will be a solution, even though you have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And and it's better that you don't know what it is. Otherwise, the person comes in talking, going, I know how this is going to end up.
Yep.
And they're going to let me talk. And this is just for show.
Yeah.
That's not okay either. You have to believe there's a solution, even though you have no idea what it is. And that's the beauty and the surprise at the end, that it becomes their solution, not
Yeah.
Jan's solution. Was I using Peter and Jan this time? Yes.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
mixing up the names. It's not Jan's solution. It's not Peter's solution. It really is their solution. And by the way, neither one of them had any idea or I couldn't have guessed what the solution was going to
Yeah.
be. And that's where we have to be open. There's going to be a solution. We have no idea what it is, and let's be surprised by it.
I love it. I love it. And Nathan agrees. He says, love the building the relationship portion. I have the highest respect for people when we've been able to navigate a conflict between us. And I think that's so important. And Brian follows that up with, read this one. I can't express how important the WIFM, the what's in it for me conversation, is when change is being considered that impacts multiple parties. And how often does it not, right? It usually does impact multiple people. It
Yes.
feeds understanding, collaboration, and agility. And I think that's so important. And that breeds also momentum to see that through. That partnership definitely helps you create the momentum, because everybody now is working toward, a shared goal, which
Yes.
is a great thing. I love these. Yeah. Yeah.
I do too. It really, and that's why it's until someone experiences it, they might not be so open to the idea that, hey, like we need conflict
Yeah.
to get along with each other, to grow our relationship, to build a
Yeah.
framework. It's my same concept of I need to make mistakes to learn. You
Yeah.
don't necessarily learn when it all goes well.
Right.
You
I think it's
become a
also great.
better,
Yeah, I think it's a
right?
great way to learn about yourself too, how you process information and how you sort of reflect back what you've heard. Because just like you said earlier in your case study, you could have, Peter who's already, or somebody in that meeting who's already, I already know how this is going to end, right?
Yes.
You can also have that with yourself. Like, I already know what they're going to say.
Yes.
But if you can be open to that, a perspective that's different from yours, that conflict, that a disagreement, a dispute could be a great opportunity to learn something about, not just about the situation or the other person, but about yourself as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what conflict usually is. It's that we've made assumptions about things that we actually don't know, but we think we know
Yeah.
about that other person, and vice versa. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of deciding what someone else is thinking, responding to that, even
Yeah.
though that might not be what they're thinking. And
Yeah.
that miscommunication and lack of communication just builds and builds and builds. And like in the first example, the layers are there. And then when they get to this lounge confrontation,
Yeah.
if we spoke about that and talked about even exchange apologies, talk about that, no, we shouldn't bring, that kind of conversation into an employee lounge. We should have talked in private. That actually would have kept them okay for a little while.
Mhm.
that really wasn't their conflict. It was the symptom. Those are just some that might ease
Yes.
it for a little bit, but their original misunderstandings about things that had been said
It,
during the prior year is what
yeah.
caused the conflict.
And I think too, and I want to read Nathan's comment first, but he says conflict is a doorway if we embrace the possibility for for conversation, the conversation that it
Beautiful.
does present. I think that's absolutely true. And you think about it too. If they're having, if the original Greg and Marcia, I almost said Peter and Jan, but if the original Greg and Marcia from the original case study, if that's the kind of thing where by the time they got right to the employee lounge and the blow up, things had been simmering before, as Anne said, slow boil. What other things were they not communicating or not listening to each other about in the course of their work? You know, other things are going to be impacted by that. It's not the one genesis of the conflict and then just those things. There are other things. You kind of have an edge about somebody. You may not read their email as carefully. You may not listen to them as carefully. You may not take that direction as carefully. You may not help them as readily with a project, even if you have a stake in that project. Those things
Yes.
they sort of multiply, and there's this collateral damage from those. So I love that this is something that you work with. I mean, what if you could, what would be, is there like one common, I know we had talked about the not addressing things when they happen, not talking about what's bothering us. Is there one key skill that people can develop or that you would suggest to begin to be able to do that?
I think focusing on how we ask questions. The tendency is to go with closed or very focused questions, and those would be uh, anything that requires the yes or no or one word answers or kind of the facts, like, oh, when did that happen? What time was it? What day? Who was there? We have to get that kind of who, what, where, and when out
Yeah.
of our minds. And one way to do that is if we're starting to ask what or is that kind of starting our question, restart it with how and
Mm,
shorten the question. Yes, and is a great habit to
yeah.
start. Now, some people don't know what to do with that when you go, yes, and
Yeah.
well, then pause and
Yeah.
let them figure out what to do with and because eventually people fill the space, the
They
empty
do.
space.
Yeah.
So I think that there isn't one thing, but that's one really good one to start with. Change how we ask questions because when you start to hear your own questions, you realize quite often we're just asking yes or no, and we close the door to the everything else that could have been offered,
Yeah.
or we focus people too much. We might say, uh, "How are you today?" You know, and we focus on, well, all right, but so I'm not going to tell them about what happened yesterday that was so exciting because they asked me
Yeah.
about today. How
Yeah.
can I support you now? Leave off the now. How can I support you?
That
Uh,
reminds me of what we talked about the first time you were on the flight attendant, where we talked about soon. Soon means different things to different people. Now could mean different things. It could be a time in your career or this moment right now. And I think that is really important. That is such an important point that you make. And
yes,
Brian says, conflict when handled properly can lead to confluence. And I definitely think
absolutely.
that it's such an opportunity for that. Yeah.
Hey, conflict really is different ideas, different perspectives,
Yeah.
different ways of looking at things. However, we're accustomed to conflict, run, avoid, don't talk about it because it's going to be very uncomfortable.
Hmm.
You know what? There's a lot of things that are initially uncomfortable. Maybe it's always going to feel uncomfortable to talk about how we're feeling. And in some ways, I think this all goes back to why is there so much conflict in the workplace, just within teams, within people.
Hmm.
I heard people speaking up and saying what they're thinking and what they're feeling because no matter what generation people were brought up in, they either were brought up by people who learned this or they were told themselves this. Don't bring your personal self to the
Right.
office. It's all business. I get that all the time. People will like sit down at the table and just go, this is all business. It's just about the money. They'll say things like that. It's just the dollars. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, great. Then this might end very quickly. And usually, even when I don't care what the big numbers are, it could be millions and millions of dollars. It could be huge promotions. When it comes down to it, it's the feelings that matter.
Yeah.
And they weren't able to talk about it because they have it in their head. Oh, my feelings don't matter
Yeah.
because they have that old rule in their head. Leave your personal self at the door. I don't know
Yep.
how to walk in the door without the personal part of me
Yeah.
coming, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny. I'm having like a total deja vu moment here. Like we've had this conversation before. And I know I see Bruce is in the chat as well. And, I've said this before and he's known me for a few years, but we spend so much time at work. We spend more time at work than on any other single activity in our day. So it
Yes.
matters. It does
Yes.
matter beyond the paycheck, beyond the compensation, because we are spending so much of our lives in the enterprise, and that's why it is so important. And that, I think, also is why people dig in and get so invested in that
Yes.
conflict, and because it's their area of focus instead of maybe the resolution of it. And I would, since you are an expert, we do have a comment from Lisa here, and she says, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this: sometimes you just have to let things ride. It can be a waste of energy. If that person keeps causing you trouble, you may have to go to your manager. Now, it's interesting because that's the case study we started with, right? Where
Yes.
someone
Yes.
had a challenge and they went right to their manager. And so, Lisa, I don't know if you were able to get in. I know LinkedIn was having a little bit of a temper tantrum, but Leslie's first case study shared with us a situation like that where someone went right to the manager with something. But yeah, you can talk us through. Yeah.
So that was a way that many of us kind of grew up in the corporate world of how things were dealt with. You didn't get along with someone, they're like, it doesn't matter. You don't have to like them. But I need to be able to communicate. It never was separated, like, all right, just do your work together. You don't have to like each other. But we do have to communicate. And that was never a focus, nor
Yeah.
was it ever part of training. It wasn't what we learned in school of
Yeah.
how to communicate in different ways with different people, the nuances, what our body language is communicating, what our faces are communicating.
Yeah.
It's only during this era of Zoom that we've actually and live streams that we're
Right.
seeing our faces. In order to look at you, I have to see what my face is doing. Well, we never knew that before, how our faces were communicating. And I do find that that really stands out and speaks loudly because there will be a team going, yeah, yeah, we want her off the team. She's so aloof, etc.
Right.
And then we'll talk about, well, what is making you think that? And it's typically body language, or they weren't speaking up, or they may
Yeah.
be quieter. They like to think about things.
Yeah.
All these differences we talk about. We love differences. We love diversity.
Yep.
Communicators are all diverse,
Yeah.
and we're not accustomed to dealing with all of that. We just never learned how to do it, so we only know how to communicate our one way.
Yeah.
And then you add in the digital options, all the different ways of communicating
Yeah.
with people. And when email came along, and I remember that transition, people used that as their wall
Yeah.
to only communicate in writing. Well,
Yeah.
guess what? They didn't practice a lot of their writing. So a lot of their writing was misunderstood and miscommunicated.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think that that's brilliant. I mean, this hour goes by so fast when I
Yeah.
talk with you. So we got to do a part 3. But I want to let everybody know, if you haven't yet, and again, this is also for people on the replay, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitch. If you're not connected with Leslie, here's how to do it. Again, she also has a YouTube channel. You definitely want to check that out and subscribe to it. The Conflict Strategist, that's what she does. And it's what we all experience every day, but we can do it in a healthy way. And I think that's so important. We are at the hour. I am going to let everybody go. I am so happy that so many
Yeah.
people were able to get here despite a little bit of challenge from LinkedIn. Thank you all. I look forward to seeing you all again. And I wish you all the best week, just the best day ahead for you. And yeah, here's to healthy conflict. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Gretchen, and thank you to everyone in the comments.
Yay. Bye. Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.